Lent started with a bang in my household. The banging was a water pipe breaking on the second floor. My wife and I were about to go out to a movie when we heard the water gushing on the inside of the wall. And we actually had to find the water main. That took me half an hour in my front yard, which was covered with snow and ice. And then someone kindly came by and found it for me with a key to the sewer, cut my water off. And we suffered through that without a lot of damage, for which I'm very grateful. But it sums up my week. It's Lent. It's just Lent. I have a publication on the market that I just am a footnote in the inliner. I did a book by Charlton Heston and the Bible called The Family Bible. Wonderful project for me because I got to critique his theology and rewrite some of it. Just love that. You remember Charlton Heston, of course, the Ten Commandments. He's up there. He's like Yahweh. He looks like Yahweh. He breaks the Ten Commandments on the ground like Yahweh. He is really an angry God, and he's going to get his, and so he does. So that's the story, and that's really good. Charlton Heston's theology is Midwestern 19th century stuff, and so he didn't, I finessed some of that for him just so he wouldn't be embarrassed. But mostly he was pretty good. He's pretty straightforward, pretty Midwestern, pretty much this. Plus the Bible, if you want to buy it for your children, has Renaissance art all the way through it. Thank you, Tom Robotham. Yes, thank you. So I had fun doing that. But I want to talk today about that picture of God, that thunder God, that... And I'm going to try to throw that down today in order to talk about the gospel, which is hard enough. God, in this text, in the person of Jesus, has nothing much that he can offer. He doesn't have much to offer. Jesus doesn't have much to offer his disciples. He doesn't have much to offer the world. He's decided he's going to die, and he talks about this with his disciples quite openly. And Peter, speaking for the rest of the disciples and for me, gets mad at Jesus because he's talking like this. Who talks like this but a crazy person? I'm going to die, God wants me to. Well, I know where to put them. Eastern State would be a good place. But there's something else going on here. That image of God as all-powerful and all good is about to take a hit. Today I'm going to talk in this sermon about powerlessness. I'm going to talk about sacrifice. And I'm going to talk about suffering. So if any of you want to leave, I won't hold it against you. Unlike the thunder god on top of the mountain thundering at Charlton Heston, and Charlton Heston just, the wind is blowing his perfect hair perfectly back. We don't live in that world, do we? We don't. We try. You can go to any salon and get your hair done for $300, and it will have that wind blown, perfectly sculpted. Of course, for me, that isn't going to happen. But it'll blow perfectly back in the wind, and you could be filmed by someone looking for a movie star and become it. Jesus is talking about dying. He's talking about powerlessness. I'm going to die. You can't stop me. And if you try, Peter, to stop me, I will tell you to get out of my way because I know what I'm doing is God's will. Do we only want a God who does all the nice things for us? That's the question. It's all resurrection and lovely and roses and incense and everything nice. And that's the world we try to live in. But don't we want a God who goes down with us to death? Who embraces that powerlessness we all are going to face? Who takes himself to the grave voluntarily, I might add, and goes down to die for all of us? The text that we need to be looking at is the one in Philippians 2, the great canonic hymn, which says, Jesus, even Jesus, did not count equality with God a thing to be seized. He didn't get that. He didn't do that. If I could count equality with God a thing to be grasped, I would do it. I'd go for that in a minute. Right? Sometimes I do, but I miss. It's just that way. But this moment that Paul is talking about, he talks about Jesus emptying himself and taking the likeness of a human being, becoming one of us, eschewing power where power could be had. Not Charlton Heston in the Ten Commandments, but a vulnerable, weak human being deciding that his death was the best way to express what God had to say to us. So in that text, he empties himself, becoming in the likeness of a human being, and then even more astonishingly, he empties himself to death. You know that destination all of us are headed to? I hated it when my church history professor said, one day the funeral procession will go all the way to the cemetery and everybody will go home but you. I was only 27. What in the world was that about, right? But I'm 62 and I'm kind of getting toward the edge of understanding what that might be like. So he became us so that God could defeat and overcome and show us the way through even death. It's a way of powerlessness. It's the way of dispossession, to quote both the I Ching and T.S. Eliot. It's the way where we don't have much to give or to get. We are dispossessed. And that way is our way. And we hate it. And I objected at 27, I'm objecting today, but it is the truth that I want a God who embraces the worst that human beings can suffer, to take hold of it, to grab it, and to rock it somewhere close to heaven and then into heaven. And that's where he was. At the end of the gospel from which this gospel comes from, the Gospel of Mark, Jesus' last words are only one, my God, why have you forsaken me? And we've all been through that, haven't we? Anglican spirituality, Anglican praxis notwithstanding. We hit a crisis. We blame God because that's easier than blaming ourselves. It's easier than blaming other people. And we talk to God if we're lucky. And God keeps talking to us. And all of a sudden, what seemed to be insurmountable is less insurmountable. And then what is less insurmountable becomes even less insurmountable. And if you think you get all the way through suffering, you are mistaken. It is a ubiquitous human experience. So that finality is embraced on the cross. That powerlessness of God, not even God will save him from his destiny and his fate. Not even God will just pick him off the cross and say, well, sorry, that really hurt, didn't it? I guess I'll bind you up and make it better and kiss your boo-boos like a little child. Jesus does not get that. He faces death directly. And so do we. However it comes, however it goes. So our Lenten discipline has become more powerless, more a servant to the sacred rather than to the human. And that task is difficult because, I'm exactly like Peter. If you're a friend of mine and you're going to die and you're going to tell me you're going to die, I'm going to fuss with you a lot. I'm going to say, life is really pretty good. Life's really could be wonderful if you just get through your depression. Life would be really wonderful if you just exercised every day and ate right? We have nostrums for everything. You can turn on the television anytime and get any remedy for any ill that you can possibly think of. There's a product for it. The only thing it'll cost you is money. Someone else will get it. Some of the products work, some of them don't. Buyer beware, but that's the way our society works. If you're uncomfortable, you get comfortable. If you're suffering, you get comfortable. If you're doing this, you get comfortable. If you're doing that, you get comfortable. Get comfortable because we can. And we have all sorts of means to soothe our pain. Powerlessness is forsaking the easy way of power. Devotion in Lent is to call our neediness into both question, but also into expression. I used to give up things for Lent that I didn't really care about. I wanted to take some things on in Lent that I really didn't need. I'd pray every Lent for a Porsche. Hadn't happened yet, just saying. Prayer isn't as advertised. You don't get what you prayed for. You get other things that are better for you. But powerlessness is an attitude of surrender toward both God and life. So if that weren't bad enough, we're going to go to sacrifice. Sacrifice is giving away something that you cherish in the service of a better life. Sacrifice is giving up what you need, what you want, what you think, to listen more closely to the interior parts of yourself, which may have wisdom that you have been working hard to avoid. That's the Lenten task. Sacrifice is saying, like Jesus did finally, not your will, not my will, he said. Excuse me, that's my prayer. Not my will, but yours be done. Yours be done. And to sacrifice means, from the Latin sacrificere, to make holy. Sacrifice makes things holy. Jesus on the cross makes the whole world holy, the whole world available to grace, the whole enchilada, as a friend of mine says. But we don't get there ourselves in our interiors unless we sacrifice, unless we give up our pretensions of power, and unless we do the last thing on my list, which is suffering. I remember a woman that I worked with at St. Paul's when I was interim rector just next door. Wonderful job, wonderful church. But we had homeless living in the wall. It's one of the few walled places in Norfolk. And they could sleep on the grounds, and they did. And most of them were gone by 6 o'clock in the morning because they were quite respectful of the privilege of sleeping there. And my goodness, it wasn't much of a place. It was cold a lot. But they were there. And I had the sad task of a woman who'd been there for a whole year, and she took off all her clothes at noon and bathed in the gutter spout. And I had to sit down and talk with her about that. And I had to remind her that she had a home in Virginia Beach, which the city had provided, and that I thought she would be maybe more comfortable there. She thanked me for talking with her about it. She agreed she had to leave, and it was painful for me, but she went off and went to another parish yard and slept there. And it was sad because it wasn't what I wanted to do, but I could never get social services or the police to treat the homeless on our yard like something and some people that needed attention. It was very, very frustrating. So, suffering that she had bipolar, not well. We sat down and had a talk in which I both tried to give her some comfort and some grace, and she succeeded in giving me much more than I was giving her. I have no idea how that happened, but I went away grateful for having had that conversation and grateful for her, and sad that she had risked bathing in the downspout at noon and thus attracting the attention of parishioners whose sensibilities were totally offended. I was sad about that. Suffering, then, is what God needs from you in Lent. Pain is what drives most of the psychopathology on earth. As a therapist and as a priest, I see clearly at times that suffering is a necessity because it brings us down into our souls, down into our depths, down into the place where we can grieve what we know out loud, where we can say, this hurts, that hurt, oh my, that hurt. If you've ever been in therapy, you may have gone through some of this. It's the kind of therapy I do. And I want people to get to their depths because it's deep down in the depths that things begin to change for people, where the darkness hits unexpected light. That's the model of Jesus for us. He's going to the cross to show us Easter, but we can't jump over the cross to get to Easter. We have to get on it with him. I'm sorry, we just do. But down in us, there is a reservoir of the presence of God. You can reach that by meditation. You can certainly reach it by suffering. There are thousands of ways, as Rumi says, to kneel and kiss the earth. But suffering is a deep part of life, and it opens us up to the need for grace and the need for God and the need for blessing, which we get from within and from without, always. It's always there. I'm not saying I understand that at every minute of every day because I don't count equality with God a thing to be grasped, so I'm stupid like everybody. Yeah, duh, Grace, where? But I know this, that suffering, my suffering, dealing with other people's suffering, has usually led to epiphanies of grace. It's lovely to see that God is working not only around us in the world, but also deep within us to purge what blocks us from the clear vision of God. And it is Lent that is designed to do this. You can do what my daughter does, which is to give up stuff for Lent that she never wants to give up, really, and she doesn't really she gives up stuff she doesn't actually eat anyway. And I love that about her. It's at least honest. It's the Lent that I've lived most of my life, and I think it's shallow. You don't need to give something up. You need to take something in yourself on. And that is your life, who you are, where you've been. Look at what's gone well, look at what's gone ill, and then dive into the most suffering parts. And you'll learn more about yourself, and then more about your life. And I promise you at some point more about God than you could risk to believe. So I'm going to invite you to a Holy Lent. You've had 2 invitations so far. The third one should be the charm, right? I'm going to invite you to a Holy Lent to take that idea of yourself as the prayer that God needs to hear. And the depth of your life is where God moves most gracefully and most deeply. And yes, there is some agony just like the cross, but in the end, there is redemption, there is resurrection, and beyond that, there is Pentecost, where God takes the whole earth and dips it into grace. Whether the world is aware of it or not is irrelevant. Whether you are aware of it or not is irrelevant. God has done that in Jesus and opened the way to God for us through this season of sacrifice, of powerlessness, and of suffering. Amen.